there. So we're talking about things that are really relational, even they can be looked at as family types of relationships. And it gets really confusing because families have different stories about themselves, you know, so it depends on what uncle you talk to, what aunt you talk to, what family relationship you get. So you might end up with some confusing family relationships, which is what I found in terms of tracking down some of these figures. And I just want to, I promise this is the only thing I will read to you. This is just the introduction to that. The Yoruba have Egungun ancestral figures that come out in elaborate masquerades of dance and music. These familial or community spirits did not travel well in the Yoruba diaspora and now exist only in Brazil and with residual traces in Cuba. But the Simbi and other venerated ancestors from Central Africa are alive on the other side of life and doing well in the Americas. This presentation will observe how the Congo-Angola figures have crossed Kalunga, also known as the Atlantic Ocean, to become important fixtures in the Central African-based religions of Cuba, where they're known as Kongo, Puerto Rico, where they're known as the Division of the Congos, in Dominican Republic, where they're called the Haitian Division, or the Division of the Negroes, of the blacks, and in Brazil, where they're called Preto Velho. They are also found in the southern United States, where they are still known as Simbi when they live in the forest. Others are represented as black dolls seating in their own chairs with their own beverage to drink. Found wherever Central Africans have gone, Simbi, Congo guys, Preto Velhos, etc., are among us, offering curative advice, helping us into the future with mercy, grace, and wisdom. And this presentation will celebrate their existence. So if we can start, I don't know how to dim the lights in here now. To actually talk about the African diaspora, and I think it's a term she got from Sweet Honey in the Rock, Bernice Reagan. It's a term she got from Bernice when Bernice was working at the Smithsonian. But the point I'm trying to make is we always use the deficit model. That is, those poor enslaved Africans, they came to the Americas, they couldn't bring their material culture. And that's beside the point. They brought the most important thing they could have brought, which were their minds. And as Henry Drew has said, and I quote it all the time, it's Africans came empty-handed, not empty-headed. But also, if you think about that, that's all you need for rebuilding a culture, restructuring your kind of social structure, because Ellis Island didn't have the Louvre. People did not bring anything other than a suitcase. We had European immigration here. So you're talking about the materials that really contained in their minds and in their heads. But so instead of the desperate model of those poor Africans, think of cultures coming to the Americas with, in many cases, to areas that are very similar to where they left. But I'm just going to quickly show some aspects of the Yoruba tradition. The Yoruba in southwest Nigeria and in this area. And another ancient kingdom, but it was basically a set of kingdoms. And this is a Yoruba king with a beaded crown. His face is covered so that Ashe, his power will not burn you, his intrinsic energy will not burn you. And there is a bird of mind, the bird that overcomes witchcraft or sorcery. So there's the idea of the sacred and the secular, the political and the sacred somehow fused too. But the kingship of the Yoruba did not travel well. But this aspect traveled a little bit. This is Egungun, the ritual dressing of the dead, or masquerading for the dead in Yoruba tradition. It's photographed by Margaret Jewell. And Henry, where was that taken?
I was taken in Ijebode.
Okay. And you can see one of the aspects of it, a lot of fabric. Fabric in many parts of Africa indicates the dead. The flowing of fabric, the strips of cloth, and that indicate ancestors are the dead. Oops. And this is Bahia, Brazil, in a drawing by Caribe, one of the famous artists from Brazil. He was born in Argentina, went to Brazil when he was about 9, and he's never let him forget he was from Argentina. You know, I never talked to him about Argentina. He said, I haven't been there since I was 9 years old. I'm 70. You know, how would I remember anything about Argentina? But he never let him say he was from Bahia. But this is his drawing of Egungun in Bahia in Itaparito. It's one of the places where it traveled extremely well. And there are quite a few Egungun houses in Bahia. This is a priest of Shango in a photograph by Pierre Berger. And you can get to see the lappets that indicate Shango has some association with ancestors. And Shango is actually a historical figure. He's himself an Egun. He was the third king of Oyo, or the fourth king of Oyo. There's an argument about that too. But this is a priest of Shango in Nigeria, or Benin, actually in Benin, in Porto Benin. And this is the priest of Shango in another photograph by Pierre Roger in Brazil. So you can see the similarity between this, well, you can see the cowrie shell covered vest and the lappets, the fabric, strips of fabric. And Gabino in Bahia, you can see that these are actually cowries here. And you can see the strips of fabric for Balbino. Balbino's name is Daniel de Paula. There's a book, Ancestralism in Bahia, by Julia Braga, and he talks about the Egungun in Bahia. And almost everybody associated with Egungun in Itaparica, every male is named Daniel de Paula. I don't know why, but that, you know, there are 7 photographs of people, and they're all Daniel de Paula. So this is also a Daniel de Paula. He's known as Balbino, and he's a priest of Shango in Bahia. But again, that hidden idea of Shango being an Egun. And this is a costume for Shango from Cuba by Lourdes Lopez, and you can notice the lappets here also. Designed with the attributes of Shango, the O'Shea, and the lightning bolt, but again, it shows the lappets and it indicates Shango's association with Egungun. And you see the same thing with Oya. Oya means the terror, but her other name is Yansa, mother of 9. And so she'll be associated with 9 colors in the Cuban context. And this is the Cuban costume, but again, you see the Yoruba idea of Egungun, or the dead being associated with Shango, with Oya, and it's indicated by the fabric and the lappets in the fabric. Another kind of tangential thing to that, but this is an so-called drum from Haiti. And the drum is an ancestral drum from Haiti, and it's dressed in fabric again to indicate that ancestralism. This is a fully dressed drum. You can see there's a picture in, I'm blanking on the name of the book right now. But there's a picture in the book of the drum dressed and undressed, where I've got it. Before the talk goes on, I'll probably remember where I got this photograph from. But this, again, is Haiti, and that idea of ancestralism in the kind of Yoruba, Benin nexus being illustrated by fabric, by draped fabric or lappets of cloth. But we move to another section of Africa, to Central Africa, and this is the old kingdom of the Congo. At least a print that represents that. Supposedly, as Barbara said, this is a stream, if at all. Is there a river still there, Barbara? Yeah. Still a river? Small river. But this would be the old kingdom of the Congo. And it's a totally different situation. This is also where we get the darkest Africa, where we get the so-called witch doctor, where we get Zambi and Pum, great God Almighty. That's where that definition. The Bakongo have a different system than the Yoruba, and this system traveled extremely well in different forms. You can recognize the models from Africa. You'll see them in the Americas. The old kingdom of the Congo, this Alvaro, the second king of the Congo. You can see his name up here, written right here. Don Alvaro Rex Kongo. And this was in 1642, and it's a Dutch delegation coming to talk to them about Christianity. But the royalty had converted to Christianity for over 150 years by the time the Dutch delegation got there. They had been Christians when they got there. But they were Christians for their own reasons and their own style of Christianity. They were Christians because they had one great God, Zambi in Kongo. They had venerated ancestors who they just saw the saints as. Venerated ancestors where we get into the Simbi. They also had their own cross. You can see a depiction of a cross right here. And it was not too false to have them dressed in European clothes, because they dressed in European clothes for a long time. One of the reasons they accepted Christianity, according to Thornton, was it was the newest weapon in the kind of political struggle between the families, the royal families, about who would be king of the Congo. But they also, the venerated ancestors was very important in the sense that they saw the Catholic saints as venerated ancestors. But they also, to them, venerated ancestors are Simbi. Simbi are twice-born ancestors who return in the natural world as rocks and streams and places in nature. And they can be benevolent. At times they can also be forces that you have to deal with that might be problematic. But they're also Simbi on a much deeper level than Simbi for everything. Simbi can be very much like the Yoruba idea of Ashe. Everything has Simbi. Everything has Ashe. Everything has an intrinsic energy of power. And on a deeper level, Simbi is, as one of the Congolese scholars, Fukia, has said, Simbi is that which holds you up. And he has a poem called Simbi Simba. Support that which supports you. So Simbi can be seen as, if you like post-quantum physics, it can be seen as the zero-point field from which everything springs, from which all potentiality springs. Simbi is that kind of energy. But the Bakongo also have their own writing system. And this is part of that writing system. This particular symbol comes out of Lemba. It's called the Dikenga, the Tenba in the Kongo, as phrased by Wyatt McGaffey. It's the Congolese cross. And it's the Equilateral Cross. The basic is the Equilateral Cross. A cross with just 4 equal length arms. And it's also called the oath-taking cross, because for someone to do an oath, they would make a cross on the ground and stand on that cross, and that would be a sign that they're swearing to something in all honesty. And in fact, Marta has done a lot of recent work in Puerto Rico, where that cross is used throughout the Espiritismo in Puerto Rico. It's used in many different ways in Puerto Rico. And one of the masters of understanding Congolese writing system is Barbara. Barbara's dissertation was on Congolese writing systems, one of the many writing systems in Africa. So, and a little is known about them, but it's extremely important when we get to the Americas. There's one of the most basic ways coming out of the initiatory group called Lemba in the Congo, and this is again called the Dikenga. And Dikenga means to turn, to swirl, the turning point. But it represents all existence. It represents as things. This is the area of conception, Musomi. This is where you're born, in Kala. This is where you reach your zenith, Tukula, and this is where you decay or age and go back into the other world, and this is November. So it's a cyclical process. Everything goes through the process according to the Bakongo. This is where you're conceived, this is where you're born, this is where you reach your zenith as an adult, this is where you die. But this is the age of children, the age of leaders and adults who run their country, the age of Ngangas or specialists. So there's top 3 to be called Makuku Matapu, the 3 cooking stoves of life. So you're looking at a really interesting, complex net for understanding our existence. But this is also the mineral world, the vegetable world, the animal world, the human world. This is also the process that everything goes through. The universe goes through this. A book goes through this. Notice the book is conceived here, you write it here, and it's published here. It reaches the zenith in terms of sales or in terms of people knowing about it, and it goes out of existence when people no longer know about it. But everything supposedly goes through this process to the Bakongo. But it travels, this writing system also travels to the Americas, where they come into other African cultures and other African ideas, and they interact with them, and they become a little bit more elaborate also. But in Congo they can be elaborate, but they bump into the Cross River traditions, some of the Yoruba traditions, and you get some of these materials. This is Galahari Zanchi in an Umbanda house with a photograph by Bob Thompson, and you can see this person. He's drawing they're called pontos riscados, drawn points in Portuguese, and he's drawing one for Eshu Marine. Now you have an Umbanda house, which is a Central African-based house. He's drawing it using a firma, which is a practice, or a pontos riscados, which is a practice from Umbanda based on Central African models. And he's talking about a Yoruba deity, Eshu, but he's using an Indian word to qualify that Yoruba deity. So you're getting a really complex mix. Eshu Marine means little Eshu. Marine is Tupi Guarani for small. So you're getting really complex mixes, complex influences with each other. And these are all pontos riscados for different Yoruba forces, or sometimes Yoruba Congo forces in Brazil. But these are also, this is a pontos riscado with a Dikenga in it, and I'm sure the person who did it didn't know anything about the Congo cross as going back and studying somebody's book. It's just a continuation of ideas in Brazil. But this is one for Haiti Congo, King of the Congo. So you have that model of the King of the Congo going into Umbanda and becoming a pontos riscado. A pontos riscado is the point where you draw, or you draw it literally, but you're also drawing that, pulling that figure to that point. It's a tool for also that. But this is one from Cuba, where they're called firmas. And the firma in Cuba is a signature. Mm-hmm. It's the signature of who? It's the signature of one of the forces of power, the Congo religion of Cuba. But a firma, it's a firma for Siete Raya. Barbara, do you know anything about that one? That firma? Yes, you do. Huh? Tell us something about that. Tell us something about that family. Well, we'll do that later. We'll do it when you do your presentation too. But this is for Siatiraya or Nzazi. Nzazi is the Kikongo word for light blue. But again, this is Cuba. And this is one from Haiti. It's a veve. Now, veve is a Mahi word or a Fon word, and it's normally applied to, in that area of Africa, it's concentric circles. But when it comes to Haiti, it hits into Congolese material and it explodes into this kind of ornate drawing. But this is a veve. It's a veve for Simbi Makaya. So they still use the word Simbi in Haiti. But Simbi Makaya is Simbi of the leaves. It's Simbi, there are many different types of leaves. There's Kaya, Makaya, and Vititi, which is another type of crawling leaf. Bush leaf is Makaya. And you will hear about Makaya a little bit later. But it's the Simbi of the leaves. And it's, again, an ancestral figure using ideas of the leaves from Haiti. And these are just this is a Congolese Nkisi. It's really a bound packet. It's Nkisi Mbumba and Bondo. You can see it bound here, tied, beaded, feathers representing powers from above. And this is a paquet Kongo from Haiti. These are two paquet Kongo from Haiti. You can see they're the exact same model. The materials have slightly shifted. And this is for Simbi Makaya, Simbi of the leaves. Bound, beaded, again tied and beaded, feathers. So there is the same model going directly from the Congo into Haiti. And normally in Haiti indicates that they know what they are. And this is another paquet Kongo from Haiti that's called Ren Congo, which is Queen of the Congo. So you're looking again at a paquet Kongo, but it's still representing some kind of African ancestry in Haiti. And this attitude is called Pakalala or Arms Akimbo, or Kimbo. And it's an attitude of aggression, of challenge. It's I challenge you. And these three different paquet Kongo. This is Simbi Makaya. This is again Ren Congo in a different posture. And this is I don't know the name of the Simbi, but there's this crucifix affixed to the Simbi. And I was talking to John Thornton once, and I was telling him about Cuban Nkisi, and they're having a crucifix with them. And I said, well, did that begin recently? And he said, no, that was in, he remembers Capuchin priest, and there are essays talking about going into Lungu in the 1600s in Congo and finding Congo Nkisi with crucifixes with them. So this started in the Congo. It didn't start here. You remember the Kingdom of the Congo, at least the royalty converted, in 1491. So you're having their own kind of Christianity. But what's interesting is that their acceptance as Christians was only because of their political power. The minute that they didn't have political power, the Portuguese were saying, well, these are devil worshippers, their Christianity is an aberration of Christianity, but really they are, when there was political power equal to that of the Portuguese, or military power, then all of a sudden they were good Christians. And they were very much interested in having, they had two embassies. They had one in the Vatican and one for Christianity, and one in Ethiopia, because they felt Ethiopia was the other African Christian country. And one of the great Christian messengers, Robert Nestor Marley, a Congo Bongo man, as he called himself, but also Marley had a record out called Kaya. That's it, but he's using it to talk about marijuana. But it's also used that way in the Congo. But it's Kaya in the Congo understood then also? Barbara, it is
Jamba.
Jamba. That's one of the words they use in Brazil for marijuana. They call it jamba. But it's funny because he's singing about Kaya. It's the same Kaya that the Haitians are talking about in Simbi Makaya. It's the Kaya from the Congo. It's all around you. In that sense, he's not talking about the ancestralism, but he's talking about another important aspect of using the hallucinogen in the Congo, and that is for deep thought. When we get to King of the Congo, there's a way we can discuss some of that. And Nkisi from the Congo. And this is Nkisi Mbuki. Again, there's this whole mistake about what Nkisi are. The Portuguese were calling them fetishes, the French carried that on. But it's a bound universe. The same way that we looked at the Ikea, this is a bound universe with elements that are mineral, animal, and vegetation. And again, tide, these are mushrooms which pun on the word to live, Utopia, and you have Intondle, and you have feathers representing the power of storms, of raptors, power from above, so it can be retributive. This is also a thing against people who break an oath. They're powers of storms, powers of raptors. But it's a miniature world, a miniature universe bound together. But if you look at the word Inkisi, it comes from the verb kinsa, which means to take care of. So this is medicine for social harmony, for physical harmony, for human harmony. And this is ingredients of Inkisi and Mwana Bunzi. And again, when you see these are roots or branches are twisted in very strange and kind of magical ways, and these are indications of sin. These are indications of a certain kind of power, a certain kind of shell, a certain kind of seed, but also a kind of twisted root or a twisted branch that has a very strange shape as indication of that kind of energy, indication of sin. So, and this is part of the ingredients of making an Inkisi. So that energy, that Sindi energy is used in that. Well, we get to Cuba, and this is a Inkisi in Cuba called the Prenda also by J.S. Barrett, and it has one of those beautiful names that indicates all the different kind of information. This comes actually from Lydia Cabrera's book, but you find it in Bob Thompson's book also. This is Tree of the Forest, 7 bells, turns the world around the midnight cemetery. Mm-hmm. So you get the forest as kind of natural world illusion, 7 bells, which I'm not sure, turns the world around the midnight cemetery. When you meet a palero, a practitioner of Kongo religion from Cuba, they say, Buenos dias at night, Buena noche during the day. They're living in an inverted world. Mm-hmm. They're living in the world of the dead. That same line that we saw in the Dikenga, the middle line goes this way, the horizontal line, that's Kalunga, and beneath it is the world of the dead, above it is the world of the living. The parallel worlds of the world of the dead, world of the living. Well, Kongo religious traditions in the Americas exist in the world of the dead. This is a Inkisi from Palo, the Kongo religion of Cuba, and it's Tree of the Forest, 7 bells, turns the world around the midnight cemetery. Mm-hmm. But we go to Brazil, and we find one of the great Kongo traditions, Macumba. And in Kikongo, Macumba can mean the great way. In Chilewa, it's a line of spirits. So you get a breakdown that's not a hierarchy that's found normally in Yoruba tradition. You don't have a line of spirits in the Yoruba tradition. But you do throughout the Brazilian traditions that are Central African influence. And Macumba is one of them. And it's Macumba now, the word is kind of a pejorative mixture. Where someone says, oh, that Macumba business. The same way some simpletons in the New York Times will say voodoo economics, using voodoo as some kind of generic pejorative. But Macumba is used the same way at times in Brazil. But the word Macumba is still used in Espiritu Santo, in Rio, and the other names are Batuki and Kabula. But one of the major forms is in Brazil, and probably the most popular religious tradition, African-based religious tradition, is Umbanda. And Umbanda, as they describe Hinduism, is like this great big religious amoeba that can absorb everything. Anything can become a part of Umbanda. And Umbanda, according to Oscar Ribas, a Angolan writer, means the science of Kimbanda, or the science of curing, the art of curing. And Kimbanda in Brazil becomes the negative side of Umbanda, but in Angola it means the person who does the curing. And in one sense, Oscar Ribas has described the person as a necromancer. Why would he be a necromancer? Because he's someone working with the dead, with spirits of the dead. This is lessons of Umbanda and Kimbanda in the words of a Preto Velho. That's the figure in Brazil, the Preto Velho. Preto Velho means old black in Brazil. And these are spirits of old blacks who have wisdom and who are compassionate. And here's one of the standard images of the Preto Velho. It's an old man, at least Preto Velho in Brazil, old man with a pipe. The pipe is always there because its significance with wisdom. And again, it's very much like the Kongo lithogram. You see the light from heaven shining on this wonderful old person who helps everybody, who's really kind to everybody. But they also have pretavelhas, the old female ancestor. So again, you see the cross, but the cross is multiple. It can be their cross, which is the Dikenga, or it can also mean the Christian cross, or it can mean both. But you have the pretavelha, which is the equivalent to the pretavelha. So they're male and female ancestral figures that are part of Umbanda that represent the wisdom of ancestors. They come in when people are in trance to offer advice, healing advice, advice about how to conduct yourself, advice about the future. And these are two different pretzels, but they're normally rustic figures and they're normally dressed in white, but these are also from Umbanda in Brazil. And they're like fathers, mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers. They have names like that. So they're Vovô Maria Kongo, Grandmother Maria Kongo, Pai Joaquim de Angola, Mãe Maria Vita de Congo, Benedita da Calunga, Maria Kongo de Angola, Vovô Catarina de Angola. And these slides show Pai Carreiro and Vovô Maria Cabinda da Bahia. So these are figures from Umbanda. In fact, I have an Umbanda catalog that has about 100 different figures that are pressed together, which are so many more than you would find in the Congo guides of Cuba. Many, many more figures. But you think about the demographics of Brazil. Brazil has 180 million people. Cuba has 17 million. So in Brazil is this huge expanse of African tradition. And many of them developing in isolation or in other ways than the African religions have traveled to the rest of the world. One of the most famous figures of Umbanda, and this is called Equilateral. And Martha talked about this same type of figure exists in Puerto Rico, where he's called Flaco. In the United States, he existed as Fast Luck, Fast Money in New Orleans. But also we've seen this type of figure in Port-au-Prince. This is Sporting Life. This is another kind of ancestral type of archetype that represents the urbanized slicker. And Equilateral is really interesting because Equilateral starts off with a country bumpkin. When you first see statues of him, or when the statues of him, when he first comes out of Cachimbo, a religion in the northeast of Brazil, he has no shirt on, his pants are rolled up, and he's barefoot, and he has a chicken in one hand, and cachaça in the other hand, and alcoholic beverage. Then you see him with a suit top, with the same suit top, but he's still rolled up, and his feet are bare. Then he's still barefoot. His pants are still rolled up, and his feet are barefoot. And then you see him as this Malandro, as this figure from the city of Rio, dressed all in white, with a Panama hat, with sometimes two-tone shoes, and he has a book of poems, and he's also a writer. But he's also the patron saint in Umbanda of people who work in the streets. He's the patron saint of prostitutes, of messengers, of vendors. He's the person who's the most urban and the most cityfied of the saints. But he also represents a slick side. He's the Malandro that comes out of knowing how to run the streets, how to write numbers, how to do a lot of hustling. And this is a joke in one of the, like this would be the Brazilian equivalent of GQ, the fashion magazine, and they have the Equilateral of the fashion plate. But he is one of the figures from Umbanda, and he's one of those black ancestral figures that travels well into the Americas. And one of the other figures of that is a Kongo, King of the Congo. This is an Umbanda figure sitting in a certain posture, smoking a pipe again associated with wisdom. And it's interesting because that whole pipe smoking in Equilateral comes out of a tradition in the Northeast called Cachimbo. Cachimbo is the Kimbundu word for pipe. So Roger Bastide has described this religious tradition as being an Amerindian tradition. And all the things he lists, he lists 5 reasons it's Amerindian. All those are true of Central Africa. He just doesn't have a clue. So why would Amerindians name their religious tradition using a Kimbundu word? They haven't. He's just misread the tradition as being Amerindian. But one of the things is Cachimbo means pipe, but Cachimbar, they have just Portuguesized the word by adding it, making it a verb. Cachimbar means to smoke a pipe, but it also means to think deeply. It's the very same thing that you find with Rastafarians, who are smoking ganja and talking about reasoning. They're not talking about lightweight thinking, they're talking about using a hallucinogen to think deeply. And it's the same situation that goes into Brazilian, and it's hidden in the language, but it's there when you just start doing a little bit of etymology in the language.
Danny? 5 minutes?
Okay. Then whoops. We've just run to Francisco and Francisca. These are two Congo guys from Cuba. And it's funny because these are stories put together by Lydia Cabrera to talk about that type of figure. These are the same figure in Cuba that we just saw as Petru Velho in Brazil. But these are quaint little stories of Negroes in Cuba. I mean, old Negroes in Brazil. I mean, that's a rough, description of that title. Yeah. And this is also Francisco and Francisco in an old Botanica window in Brazil, in New York. It was called Kongo Real, Royal Congo, in New York as a Botanica. And this is Francisca and this is Francisco. But now they've been kind of creolized with Yoruba tradition, so she's dressed in Yemaya colors and he's dressed in Shango colors. And this is Francisco. But Francisco is not the kind of nice, gentle old man that you see in the Petruvelos. This Francisco, the Cuban Congo guys can be fierce too. They can have another kind of strength that they don't have in Brazil. And this is Francisco Siete Raya. Francisco with 7 rays. Another Francisco, but a Cuban model that's sliding into Puerto Rican influences too. Because this is Siete Raya. Siete Raya is Ninkisi, a Congo-based Ninkisi from Cuba that's 7 rays, but it's also creolized that you can see with the red and white, the Shango. So Francisco Siete Raya, or it's Francisco Nzazi in Malorongo, this is from Enrique Hernandez in Guanabacoa, La Hatta Guanabacoa in Cuba. But again, this is the same Siete Rayas that they talk about, Francisco Siete Raya. And it's also, the Cuban Inquisis also have Spirit of the Dead in them. Again, this is no longer Francisco. This has now become, for who?
No, did your slide go backwards?
No, this is a joke. This is the same chromolithogram used over and over again for different things. It's not Francisco. Now this is Candelo. Candelo is a Haitian, so-called, the Dominicans say he comes from Haiti. The Cubans say he comes from Haiti. The Haitians don't have him. So I don't know exactly what they're doing. But this is Candelo. And Candelo is an interesting figure because he's fused with elements that would be like Ogun. A Cuban scholar has described him to me as having elements like Ogun, because they use rum and they paint flames on the ground and they light them, so he's associated with fire also. But this is Candelo that comes, he's also in Puerto Rico and in Dominican Republic. And this is Candelo in a store on Amsterdam Avenue in New York City with the red cross over his shoulder, and these are all, this is Candelo too, right next to a saint. But the thing is, they're interchangeable in terms of these black ancestral figures. They could be Francisco. If you come from another line, it's Francisco. That's not just Candelo. And this Claudio Fortunato used to get days doing a performance of Candelo. And this made many Dominicans annoyed. Because this is something in the closet, you don't bring out in the public, you don't talk about it. But this is one of the dancers, got a bottle of rum, a cigar in his hand, had the red cloth again showing that kind of mediating Congolese power. And they're doing it in a performance called Quisqueya on the Hudson. It was in 1997. And what's interesting is that, first of all, they don't do public performances of Candelo because you don't talk about Candelo. Candelo is what you do at home in secret. But this is a Dominican group doing Candelo. But it's interesting. Claudio Fortunato, Spanish name, used to get days. At the Dahomian royal line get days. And, so it indicates the Dahomian and Haitian connection doing Candelo, a Congo spirit. Candelo has names like Candelo Viejo, Candelo Kongo. So he's old Candelo or Congo Candelo. The Botanica on Manhattan Avenue, and it's a Botanica San Expedito, and it's Gede Limbo. So you know it's a Dominican Botanica. With one of the doors in the Botanica, Catholic saints, Yemoja, you can see Yemoja up here. The Catholic saint, but you also have Martha Dominadora. Martha, Henry is the expert on this figure. Henry has a huge show opening up at the Fowler next year on Mami Wata. She's also known as Mami Wata, but there's many other names for her. She's also known as Filomena Lubana in the Dominican style, in Dominican voodoo. Another statue, this is the famous depiction of her. Beautiful. She was really a Samoan woman used for a poster for a European circus, but has become the model for Mami Wata or Martha Dominadora in the Americas. Some statues of her. Two different versions of her next to some Congo guides from Cuba in the same Botanica window. You see a few close-ups of her. And we come to another one of these figures. But this is no longer Candelo. This is now Tata Jose. So again, this lithograph can be used for all these black figures, depending on what culture you're coming from. It just shows, that's why I said it's a family affair. They're all related because of their Central African ancestry. So this is now Ta Jose or Tata Jose, which is Cuban, but becomes popular in Puerto Rico and in many other places in the Caribbean, Spanish-speaking places in the Caribbean. Another very famous figure, Lama Dama. And then we're going to close with these Lama Damas. And Lama Dama, as Martin has described, Martin has done a few conferences on African traditions, Central African tradition in Puerto Rico. And Madama is described as an Anglophone black woman in Puerto Rico. There's also Lama Dama Francaise, who dresses as Madras material, who represents a Francophone black woman. But these are figures that you can see throughout Puerto Rican shops and botanicas, but they're called Lama Dama, or Madam. And this is again La Madama next to a line of Kongo guides in the Botanica. A close-up of the younger La Madama. And it's really a part of Puerto Rican culture too. In a mural by Manny Vega, you can see La Madama associated with bomba, one of the national musics of Puerto Rico. So you can see all of the Madama. But this is really a fossilizing of the dress of a certain period in colonial history in both the Caribbean and the United States. So we have a lot of those images. Again, a close-up of La Madama by Manny Vega. He's actually a brilliant painter from the Bronx, initiated in Candomblé in Brazil, but also who writes about popular culture. This is La Madama and as associated with bomba. But La Madama is not. Again, this is a Los Primeros de la 21 doing bomba. You can see the type of drums they're doing bomba drums. You can see the tie kerchief, the head tie. And in some places, the head tie has been taken to this incredibly ornate fashion. In Martinique, in the older Jamaican styles, and Trinidadian styles, like in Martinique, the way the head is tied, you can tell whether you're married, whether you're looking for a husband, whether you're a fashion plate, or whether you're just covering your head. There are all these different styles of tying your hair, or tying your scarf on your head. But this is the United States in 1930, and it's Lillian Roth singing from the film Sing You Singers, but you can see the same type of head tie, the same type of dress in the American South. Now the problem is in the American South is that you can, again from the 1800s, Dixon's stove polish, you can see this figure. This figure is what becomes Aunt Jemima in the minstrel shows. And Aunt Jemima then makes her way onto the pancake box, but it becomes a derogatory image and it becomes really a vulgar image. Like in this one, where it's racist caricatures for some baking powder. But again, it's the same figure. This is the United States. This is, if you look at the costumes, you're saying this is also La Madama in the United States. But people in the United States, African Americans, have been taught to be ashamed of this imagery because of the minstrel show, and have rejected it as opposed to accepting it as some kind of model of an ancestral figure that we should also venerate. So, again, another statue, but this is the statue of the King of the Congo. And it's the King of the Congo in a pose called Lundu. That's an enclosure, a red cloth across his shoulder, the shoulder which is that dynamic cloth of mediation in Congo tradition, smoking a pipe, a kachimbo, which is the sign of reflection and reasoning. And I hope I've just given you some reason to reflect and think about these African images as we talk on further. Thank you.